Imagine for a second being pulled entirely out of the ordinary geometry of human existence.
Okay.
A man in Christ is snatched up to the third heaven, like the highest reality of paradise. And he hears words so profound, so terrifyingly massive, that human syntax literally fractures trying to hold them.
Right. It's an impossible experience.
Exactly. It's illegal, impossible to even utter them. And you naturally expect the greatest theological treatise in history to follow this, right? But instead, the text violently slams the door on our visual curiosity and just crashes us back to the dirt, to agonizing human weakness and a thorn in the flesh.
Yeah. It's a massive pivot.
It really is. Welcome to the debate. Our focus is 2 Corinthians 12. What can we responsibly say about Paul's journey to the third heaven? And, why does this profound mystical event aggressively refuse to satisfy human curiosity?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Right, and looking at the historical mechanics of this text, I'd argue Paul's deliberate silence on the details acts as a calculated anti-boast. He introduces this experience almost like a sealed courtroom document.
A sealed document?
Yeah. The existence of the journey is entered into evidence to establish his standing, but the contents are legally barred from public view. And he does this specifically to dismantle the status-obsessed, credential-driven culture of the Corinthian church.
Okay, I see the logic in viewing this as a rhetorical tactic, but I've got to say, that framing feels a little too neat.
Really?
Yeah, it domesticates a text that is frankly meant to be wild. The tension of the unsaid here isn't just a strategy. It is a profound theological paradox. Paul brings up an experience of unimaginable magnitude and then refuses to clarify even the basic physical parameters.
Right. The whole in the body or out of the body thing?
Exactly. He states twice, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, and then he strips the event entirely of visual data. He focuses purely on what was heard, only to tell us, oh, by the way, I can't repeat it. So this isn't just a sealed document, right? It actively challenges the human temptation to map out heavenly geography. It forces us to sit in this incredibly uncomfortable space between untouchable divine mystery and, grinding daily suffering.
Well, to understand why that sealed document dynamic is so necessary, we really have to look at the friction between what 2 Corinthians 12 actually documents and what human imagination, demands.
Which is a lot. People want details.
Oh, absolutely. But the specific details provided are incredibly sparse. The event happened 14 years prior to the writing of the letter. Paul speaks in the third person saying, I know a man in Christ.
Right, distancing himself.
Yeah. He uses the terms third heaven and paradise interchangeably, and he heard inexpressible words. That is literally the sum total of the data. He completely starves the reader of the scenery they crave.
But see, that starvation is precisely why we have to question the mechanics of his argument here. If you have the most profound spiritual experience imaginable, why do you keep it practically hidden for a decade and a half?
It's a long time.
14 years is an agonizingly long time to hold a secret of this magnitude. We don't see Paul in the book of Acts opening his sermons in Athens or Ephesus by announcing, hey, I am the man who toured the third heaven.
No, definitely not.
He buries the lead for 14 years, and when he finally surfaces it, he gives us zero geography, no thrones, no gates, no angelic hierarchies. Why the silence?
Well, he buries it because in the Greco-Roman world, and specifically in Corinth, visionary experiences were currency. Corinth was a wealthy, highly competitive city. They were obsessed with rhetoric and social climbing.
Sure, status was everything.
Exactly. And the church there was being seduced by itinerant philosophers and leaders. These people Paul sarcastically calls super apostles.
The super apostles, yeah.
Right, and you have to think of them not like modern social media influencers, but more like ancient academics flashing exclusive Ivy League credentials to shut down discourse. They used eloquent speech and claims of spectacular spiritual visions to build their own authority and to demand financial patronage, honestly.
So they were monetizing their spirituality.
Precisely. If Paul gives the Corinthians the visual geography of paradise, He is just handing them another credential to idolize.
Okay, let me push back on that, though. If his ultimate goal is to preach humility and dismantle their obsession with exclusive spiritual credentials, why mention the third heaven at all?
Well,
I mean, you don't defeat a boast by offering a bigger boast, right? Saying, I went to the highest heaven, but I can't tell you about it. It runs the risk of just sounding evasive.
I don't think it's evasive.
But if he really wanted to subvert their value system, he could have just stuck to his sufferings. By introducing paradise, he is still kind of playing their game, even if he refuses to show them the cards.
See, I disagree. He isn't playing their game. He is breaking the board they are playing on.
How so?
Well, in the chapter prior, chapter 11, Paul engages in what scholars call the fool's speech. He says, essentially, if you want to boast according to human standards, I will too. But look at the mechanics of his boast. What does he list?
Prisons, floggings, shipwrecks.
Right. Deep sea exposure, starvation. To a Roman mind, that list doesn't prove you're spiritual. It proves the gods hate you. Honor in Rome meant invincibility. So Paul paves the road to his ultimate revelation with trauma. And when he finally drops the ultimate credential, paradise, he immediately severs it from any utility for self-promotion. By speaking in the third person, I know a man. He completely alienates his present self from the man who had the vision.
The third-person distancing is fascinating, I'll give you that. But I still think the real subversion happens in what you mentioned earlier, the refusal to provide the map.
The lack of geography?
Right, because we have to look at how a first-century audience understood the cosmos. In Second Temple Jewish literature, texts like the Book of Enoch or the Testament of Levi, there were complex, highly structured layers of heavens.
Yeah, 3, 7, even 10 heavens, depending on the tradition.
Exactly. The lower heavens contained weather and stars, higher heavens contained angelic armies, the highest contained the throne of God. So, a first-century reader hearing third heaven expected a structural tour. They fully expected a catalog of angels and architecture.
And Paul completely denies them that catalog. He uses the word paradise, which, derives from a Persian word for a walled garden of delight.
Like Eden.
Right. And it's the exact word Jesus used on the cross when speaking to the repentant thief. It implies intimate presence and communion. But the focus is entirely relational, not geographical. By deliberately withholding the visual scenery, Paul protects the divine space from human manipulation.
Yes, because if he gave them a map,
The Corinthians would have turned it into a methodology. They would have tried to reverse engineer their own ascent.
which is exactly the opposite of how Paul describes the mechanics of his own experience. He says he was caught up or snatched up. The Greek verb there is harpazo.
Harpazo, yeah.
It implies a sudden, forceful seizing. The initiative was entirely God's. There was no meditative formula, no three-step rhetorical process to trigger a heavenly journey.
None at all.
And that brings us to the inexpressible words. The Greek phrase areta remeta doesn't just mean things I am forbidden to say. It carries this heavy weight of things that are fundamentally unspeakable. Like human language literally lacks the structural architecture to hold them.
Which means that the highest truth cannot be contained in the sophisticated rhetoric the Corinthians prize so much. They were obsessed with eloquent speech, but Paul encounters a reality that renders speech impossible.
Wow. Yeah.
And it forces a complete narrative shift because the passage denies us a geographical map, and because the words cannot be spoken, the text violently redirects our momentum. Verse 7 acts as a crash landing back to human frailty.
The thorn.
Yes. To keep him from becoming conceited by the surpassing greatness of the revelations, he was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me.
And this is where the text becomes incredibly difficult to swallow. I mean, we go straight from the highest reality of paradise to the brutal reality of pain. We really have to confront the violent language Paul uses here.
It is intense.
He calls it a messenger of Satan. And the word for torment, kolaphizo, it literally means to strike with the fist or to beat repeatedly. He isn't romanticizing his suffering here.
No, he's not.
He isn't claiming some stoic detachment where physical pain doesn't matter.
It is a genuine, agonizing torment.
Right. And we have to draw a hard line here between what is known and what remains endlessly debated. The text refuses to specify what the thorn actually was.
Which drives people crazy.
It does. Theological interpretations vary wildly. Some argue it was a severe physical illness, maybe pointing to the chronic eye issue he hints at in his letter to the Galatians. Others suggest it was a speech impediment, or constant violent persecution, or intense psychological anguish.
We just don't know.
We simply do not know. But the mechanics of its function are explicitly stated. It was a spiritual break. The heights of the revelation carried a lethal danger of pride, so God permitted this affliction to serve as a governor on the engine of Paul's ego.
I understand the theological function of the spiritual break, but look at the staggering implication of what you're saying. The same God who grants a man a vision of paradise permits a messenger of Satan to continually beat him, specifically to keep him humble.
It's a tough paradox.
It shatters the modern assumption that a high degree of spiritual favor insulates a person from suffering. It implies that an extraordinary experience with the divine might actually necessitate a corresponding, humiliating earthly pain.
It is a devastating blow to that whole super-apostle theology of invincibility. And Paul doesn't just passively accept it either. He begs for deliverance. He pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away.
Reminds you of Gethsemane.
Exactly. It echoes Jesus in Gethsemane, praying 3 times for the cup of suffering to pass. Paul wanted out of the pain. He believed, quite rationally I think, that his ministry would be far more effective without this chronic hindrance.
Which makes the divine response the true climax of the passage. God does not remove the thorn. Instead, Christ speaks the only words we actually get to hear in this entire narrative. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.
It's a complete redefinition of how power operates in the world.
It really is. It wasn't the answer Paul wanted. It was a firm no regarding the removal of the pain, but it was accompanied by a sustaining presence.
And we need to look closely at the Greek mechanics of that sustaining presence. When Paul accepts this response, he says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me."
That word rest is interesting.
Yeah. The word is episkano. It literally means to pitch a tent or to tabernacle over someone. It evokes the image of the divine presence covering the tabernacle in the wilderness. Paul's humiliating weakness becomes the exact coordinate where the glory of God pitches its tent. His brokenness is the site of the covering.
That flips the entire Corinthian value system completely upside down. The super-apostles claimed that power was evidenced by eloquent speech, robust health, spectacular visions.
Total perfection.
Right. But Paul counters that true divine power is perfected, brought to its intended completion, only in the context of human inability. This has massive implications for today. We live in an era that demands constant triumphant testimony.
Oh, absolutely.
If a leader today had a third heaven experience, we would demand the geographic details, the book deal, and the methodology. A struggle or a pain is only acceptable if it's already in the past, used as a prologue to a victory story.
But that demand for triumph completely ignores how Paul handles his own ignorance in this text. We haven't fully addressed the fact that the Apostle Paul, the man writing a massive portion of the New Testament, admits, "I don't know," twice in the span of 2 verses.
Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows.
Exactly.
I actually see that admission of ignorance as the ultimate marker of theological maturity. Modern readers are so conditioned to confuse certainty with faith. We want our experts to have mapped every single inch of the spiritual realm.
We want total control.
Yes. But Paul establishes God knows as the definitive boundary line. When the mystical experience exceeds the architecture of human language, God knows. When the mystery defies our attempts to organize it into a neat, easily consumable theological system, God knows. Refusing to invent details where God has chosen silence makes Paul an incredibly reliable narrator.
And it protects the reader as well. The reference of the text requires us to say, the text does not authorize me to describe what Paul refused to describe.
If we start filling in the colors of the gates, the dimensions of the paradise, the hierarchies of the third heaven, we aren't exercising faith.
No, we're just speculating.
Right. We are exercising human control over divine mystery. We're turning a profound encounter into speculative architecture. Paul proves that the highest spiritual encounter does not eliminate the most basic, fundamental position of a human being, a servant entirely dependent on grace to survive the day.
And that is the radical tension we are forced to sit in. Because, let's be honest, if there was a map, if there was a formula to trigger the third heaven, people would chase the euphoria of the experience rather than cultivating the character required to survive it.
Oh, 100%.
People want the third heaven, but they furiously avoid the daily cross. They want the revelation, but they run from the thorn. Paul demonstrates that being caught up to paradise doesn't offer an escape hatch from earthly responsibility.
No, it doesn't.
You can hear the inexpressible words of God, and then you still have to come back down and deal with the exhausting, mundane reality of a fractured church in Corinth, the physical toll of travel, and the relentless criticism of your peers.
The hope of paradise isn't meant to irresponsibly detach us from the earth, right? It provides a completely different metric by which to live on it. If you have genuinely encountered the reality of the third heaven, you no longer need to sell your soul for temporary social leverage in Corinth.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you know that God's grace tabernacles over you in your absolute lowest, most humiliating moment, you just don't need to construct a frantic mask of invincibility anymore.
Which brings us to a critical point of convergence in this debate, I think. Whether we analyze this passage as a highly calculated anti-boast used to rhetorically disarm arrogant opponents, or as a deliberate structural paradox designed to teach us how to navigate the tension between divine mystery and physical suffering, the text issues a clear prohibition. 2 Corinthians 12 strictly forbids treating heaven as a tourist destination for human curiosity.
It does. And it utterly rejects the idea that a profound, genuine experience with God grants a person immunity to earthly suffering. The ultimate miracle in this narrative wasn't that God removed the thorn in the flesh. The miracle was the quiet, sustaining grace to endure it without losing faith.
Paul goes to the highest height a human being could possibly mention, paradise, the third heaven, hearing the inexpressible. And then he plunges down to the most humiliating reality of the human condition, weakness, a chronic thorn, desperate pleading, absolute dependence.
Yeah.
And right in the agonizing space between those two extremes, we find the only certainty the text actually offers. My grace is sufficient for you.
It is a profound lesson in historical and theological restraint. The silence is weaponized against our arrogance, sure, but it is also a grace. The speculative details of the third heaven are withheld so that the sufficiency of grace in the midst of weakness can take the absolute center stage. Paul's experience invites immense awe, but the text ultimately teaches restraint.
Yeah. Some mysteries are recorded in the biblical text not so we can exploit them or turn them into speculative theology, but so we can learn humility, context, and reverence. The passage points far less to our insatiable curiosity about the scenery of heaven and much more to the limits of human speech before divine mystery.
We are left exactly where Paul intended us to be. We're reminded of a man pulled completely from the ordinary geometry of life, standing in the third heaven, hearing words that would unravel our understanding of the universe. Yet the door to that room remains firmly, deliberately shut to our eyes. Because the truth is, the most important thing Paul brought back from paradise wasn't a structural map of where he had been. It was the crushing, beautiful realization that even a man who has seen heaven still desperately needs grace to survive the realities of earth.